Tonight, we begin with a story that has been whispered across generations, told by candlelight in cottages and grand halls alike. A tale where kindness meets destiny, where glass slippers dance on marble floors, and where true love finds its way through the darkest of nights. So before you settle into your pillows and let the world fade away, take a moment to close your eyes and let your imagination wander to a kingdom where magic still breathes in every shadow and every star holds a promise. This isn't just any story about a princess and a prince. This is the story of two hearts that found each other against impossible odds, of love that bloomed in the space between midnight chimes, and of how sometimes the most beautiful endings begin with the humblest of beginnings. Tonight, as sleep calls to you like a gentle tide, we'll walk through enchanted forests and golden ballrooms, where every step leads us closer to discovering that the greatest magic of all lives, not in fairy godmothers or pumpkin carriages, but in the courage to believe that love always finds a way. The story begins not in a palace, but in a small cottage at the edge of a village where morning mist clung to the windows like whispered secrets. This was where Cinderella lived, though she rarely thought of it as living. Each day began before the sun painted the sky with its first brushstrokes, when the house still held the quiet dreams of those who slept in warm beds, while she tended to cold hearths and empty pantries. Her stepmother's voice would echo through the narrow hallways, like thunder rolling across distant hills. Sharp commands about washing and mending, about floors that needed scrubbing and meals that needed preparing. Cinderella would listen with patience that ran deeper than any well, her hands already moving to fulfill whatever tasks awaited her. She had learned long ago that resistance only brought more hardship, and kindness, even in the face of cruelty, was the one treasure no one could steal from her heart. The village beyond her doorstep buzzed with excitement these days, for word had spread like wildfire through every shop and tavern. The prince would soon celebrate his birthday, and with it would come the grandest ball the kingdom had ever witnessed. Invitations had been sent to every household, wrapped in ribbons of gold and sealed with wax that bore the royal crest. Even the humblest families received their summons to dance in the palace halls, where crystal chandeliers cast rainbows across walls adorned with tapestries from distant lands. Cinderella had held their invitation only once, her fingers tracing the elegant script that promised an evening of music and dancing, of feasts that would last until dawn broke over the palace gardens. Her stepmother had snatched it away before the dream could take root, declaring that such frivolity was not meant for girls who had work to do. There would be gowns to press and hair to arrange, for her stepsisters would attend in all their finery, leaving Cinderella behind to tend the house like a forgotten shadow. But dreams, Cinderella had learned, are stubborn things. They live in the spaces between heartbeats, in the pause between one breath and the next. As she swept the hearth that evening, watching sparks dance up the chimney like tiny stars seeking their way home, she allowed herself to wonder what it would feel like to wear a gown that rustled like autumn leaves, to dance across floors so polished they reflected the light of 1,000 candles. Meanwhile, in the palace that crowned the hill overlooking the village, Prince Charming stood at his window, watching those same stars emerge in the deepening sky. The weight of his approaching birthday pressed upon his shoulders like a cloak made of expectations and royal duty. His father, the king, had made his intentions clear as crystal. The ball was not merely a celebration, but a carefully orchestrated opportunity for the prince to choose a bride from among the kingdom's most eligible maidens. The prince understood the necessity of such arrangements. Kingdoms needed alliances, and royal marriages were the threads that wove peace between neighboring lands. Yet his heart yearned for something his tutors and advisors could never teach him to find. He wanted to meet someone whose laughter would surprise him, whose thoughts would challenge his own, whose presence would make him feel like more than just a title and a crown. Night after night, he walked through the palace gardens, where moonlight turned the fountain spray into liquid silver, and roses released their perfume into air that carried the distant sounds of village life. Somewhere beyond the palace walls lived the woman he would marry, though she didn't know it yet, and neither did he. The thought both thrilled and terrified him, for how could he possibly recognize true love when it arrived dressed in the costume of political necessity? His closest friend and advisor, a young man named Thomas, who had grown up alongside him in the palace, often found him during these midnight wanderings. Thomas understood the prince's dilemma better than most, for he too had watched love bloom in unexpected places. He had seen kitchen maids whose wisdom surpassed that of scholars, and noble ladies whose hearts were as cold as winter stone. Perhaps, Thomas had suggested one evening, as they walked past beds of jasmine that perfumed the night air, true love will find a way to reveal itself, even at a ball filled with pretense and pageantry. The prince had smiled at his friend's optimism, though doubt still clouded his thoughts like morning fog over the lake. How could genuine feeling flourish in a room where every smile was calculated and every conversation weighed for political advantage? Yet he held on to Thomas's words like a lifeline, hoping that somehow, impossibly, his future bride would find a way to show him her true self amid all the practiced curtsies and rehearsed compliments. Back in the cottage, Cinderella's days had grown longer and more demanding as the ball approached. Her stepsisters filled their hours with dress fittings and dance lessons, their excited chatter echoing through the house like songbirds announcing the dawn. They spoke of nothing but the prince, imagining themselves waltzing in his arms, picturing the crown that would one day rest upon their heads. Cinderella listened to their dreams while she mended their gloves and polished their dancing slippers, her own heart keeping rhythm with wishes she dared not speak aloud. She imagined what it would feel like to be chosen, not for political gain or social advancement, but simply for being herself. The thought seemed as impossible as catching starlight in her bare hands. Yet it warmed her through the coldest nights when the fire had died to embers and the house creaked with winter's breath. Her stepmother watched these preparations with the intensity of a general, planning a crucial battle. Every detail had to be perfect, from the curl of her daughter's hair to the shade of powder on their cheeks. This ball represented their best chance to rise above their current station, to transform from minor gentry into royalty itself. She would allow nothing, especially not Cinderella's wistful sighs, to interfere with her ambitions. The night before the ball, as Cinderella helped her stepsisters into their beds, each of them had whispered their secret hopes into the darkness. The eldest dreamed of being announced as the prince's chosen bride before the entire court. The younger imagined their wedding day, with flowers cascading from every window and church bells ringing across the kingdom. Their mother dreamed of power and prestige, of never again having to worry about paying debts or maintaining appearances. Only Cinderella lay awake in her small room under the eaves, listening to the wind whisper through the bare branches outside her window. Tomorrow night, while music floated from the palace and laughter echoed through halls she would never see, she would sit alone by the dying fire, wondering what magic felt like when it touched a life that had known so little of it. She pressed her face against the cold glass of her window and gazed up at the stars that seemed close enough to touch. Somewhere among those distant lights, she believed, lived the dreams of every soul who had ever dared to hope for something more than their circumstances allowed. Tomorrow would bring the ball, and with it the chance for 3 women from her household to dance with destiny itself. But tonight, in the quiet space between sleeping and waking, Cinderella allowed herself to dream of glass slippers and midnight chimes, of a prince who would see past the soot on her hands to the light in her heart, and of a love story that would begin not with royal decree, but with the simple magic of 2 souls recognizing each other across a crowded room. The morning of the ball arrived with a sky painted in shades of pearl and rose, as if the heavens themselves were dressing for the grand occasion. Cinderella woke before the first bird sang its greeting to the dawn, her dreams still clinging to her consciousness like morning dew on spiderwebs. She had dreamed of dancing, of music that seemed to lift her feet from the ground, and of eyes that looked at her with recognition rather than dismissal. The house erupted into chaos before the sun had fully risen. Her stepmother's voice carried through every room like a conductor orchestrating a symphony of preparation. Dresses needed final alterations. Hair required elaborate arrangements, and jewelry demanded careful selection. Cinderella moved through it all like a ghost, her hands busy with 100 small tasks, while her mind wandered to places where kindness was currency and dreams were more valuable than gold. Her stepsisters stood before their mirrors like queens preparing for coronation, each convinced that tonight would transform their lives forever. The eldest practiced her curtsy until her legs trembled with exhaustion, while the younger rehearsed conversations she hoped to have with the prince, her words tumbling over each other in nervous excitement. They spoke as if the outcome were already decided, as if fate were nothing more than a seamstress waiting to hem their destiny to the perfect length. Cinderella helped them into their gowns with the patience of someone who had learned that gentleness could exist even in the presence of cruelty. The fabric felt like liquid moonlight beneath her fingers, silk and satin that whispered promises of elegance with every movement. She laced their corsets and arranged their jewels, transforming them into creatures that sparkled like distant stars, beautiful and untouchable. As the afternoon shadows grew longer, stretching across the cottage floors like fingers reaching toward evening, the excitement in the house reached its crescendo. The carriage that would carry them to the palace waited outside, its brass fittings polished to mirror brightness, and its horses stamping impatiently against the cobblestones. The driver, resplendent in his formal livery, checked his pocket watch with the solemnity of a man entrusted with delivering princesses to their destiny. Cinderella stood in the doorway as her step-family prepared to depart, their gowns rustling like autumn leaves caught in a gentle wind. Her stepmother paused before entering the carriage, her eyes falling upon Cinderella with something that might have been pity if it weren't so calculating. For a moment, The older woman seemed to see her stepdaughter not as a servant, but as a young woman whose beauty, even hidden beneath work clothes and soot, possessed a quality that no amount of finery could manufacture. "The fire needs tending," her stepmother said finally, her voice carrying the weight of all the words she chose not to speak. "And the kitchen requires cleaning after our preparations. I trust you'll find enough to occupy yourself while we're gone." The carriage wheels turned against the stones with a sound like distant thunder, carrying away not just 3 women in silk and pearls, but the last echoes of laughter and excitement that had filled the house for weeks. Cinderella watched until the vehicle disappeared around the bend in the lane, swallowed by the gathering dusk that painted the world in shades of purple and gold. The silence that followed felt different from the usual quiet of evening. It pressed against her ears with the weight of possibility, as if the very air were holding its breath, waiting for something extraordinary to unfold. Cinderella closed the door and leaned against it, listening to the sound of her own heartbeat echoing in the empty rooms that suddenly felt larger than they ever had before. She moved through her evening tasks with mechanical precision, her hands working while her thoughts danced to music she could almost hear drifting from the direction of the palace. The fire needed wood, the dishes required washing, and the floors bore the evidence of the day's frantic preparations. Yet, with each completed chore, she felt not the satisfaction of duty fulfilled, but the growing ache of dreams deferred. Outside her window, the first stars appeared like scattered diamonds against velvet sky. The music would be starting soon, she knew. The prince would enter the ballroom to the sound of trumpets announcing his arrival, and every maiden present would hold her breath, hoping to catch his eye. The dancing would begin with formal presentations and careful introductions, each young woman a carefully wrapped gift presented for royal consideration. As Cinderella swept the last of the day's debris into the fireplace, she found herself humming a melody she couldn't remember learning. The tune seemed to rise from some deep place within her heart, a song of longing that had been waiting years for the right moment to emerge. Her feet began to move in time with the music only she could hear, her worn shoes gliding across the kitchen floor as if it were polished marble instead of rough stone. She closed her eyes and let the music carry her away from the cottage, away from the endless cycle of chores and criticism, into a world where she wore gowns that flowed like water and danced with partners who saw her as she truly was. In this world, her stepmother's harsh words couldn't reach her, and her stepsister's mockery held no power over her spirit. The sound of weeping interrupted her reverie, soft sobs that seemed to come from the garden beyond the kitchen door. Cinderella paused in her sweeping, her heart immediately responding to the sound of another's sorrow. She set down her broom and stepped outside into the cool night air, following the sound to its source among the rose bushes that grew wild at the garden's edge. There, seated on the old stone bench that had weathered countless seasons, sat an elderly woman whose tears caught the moonlight like pearls. Her clothes were simple but clean, and her silver hair was pulled back in a style that spoke of dignity, maintained despite obvious hardship. She looked up as Cinderella approached, her eyes reflecting a sadness so profound it seemed to echo through the night itself. "Forgive me," the woman said, her voice carrying the tremor of age and emotion. "I didn't mean to disturb anyone. I was simply walking past when the sound of music from the palace reminded me of evenings long past, when these old bones could still remember what it felt like to dance. Cinderella knelt beside the bench, her heart immediately opening to the stranger's loneliness. "You're not disturbing anyone," she said gently. "I was just inside, listening to that same music and wondering what it would feel like to be there, dancing under those crystal chandeliers." The old woman studied Cinderella's face in the moonlight, taking in the kindness that shone there despite the soot on her cheeks and the weariness in her posture. "And why aren't you there, child? A young woman as lovely as you should be dancing with the rest of them." A laugh escaped Cinderella's lips, though it held more sadness than mirth. "Lovely? I'm afraid you're seeing things that aren't there. I'm just the girl who tends the fires and scrubs the floors. Girls like me don't go to royal balls." The old woman's eyes sparkled with something that might have been mischief, or perhaps it was simply the reflection of starlight caught in tears that had stopped falling. She reached out with a weathered hand and gently touched Cinderella's cheek, her fingers surprisingly warm against the cool night air. "Child," she said, her voice carrying a quality that made the very air around them seem to shimmer, "I have lived long enough to know that beauty isn't found in silk gowns or jeweled tiaras. True beauty lives in hearts that remain kind despite hardship, in souls that offer comfort to strangers, in spirits that refuse to let cruelty extinguish their light." As she spoke, the garden around them began to change in ways that defied explanation. The roses, which had been drooping with the weight of approaching winter, straightened their stems and burst into bloom, their petals releasing a fragrance so sweet it seemed to carry promises of spring. The old stone bench beneath them grew warm, as if heated by some internal fire that had nothing to do with earthly flames. Cinderella felt her breath catch in her throat as she watched the transformation unfold. The woman beside her seemed to glow with an inner light that made the moonbeams pale in comparison, and when she smiled, it was as if the very stars had decided to dance in celebration. "Who are you?" Cinderella whispered, though part of her already knew the answer would change everything. "I am someone who has been waiting a very long time to meet you," the woman replied, rising from the bench with grace that belonged to someone decades younger. "I am your fairy godmother, dear child, and tonight, if you're willing to trust in magic and believe in the impossible, we're going to make sure you attend that ball." The words hung in the air, between them, like soap bubbles, catching rainbow light, beautiful and fragile, and somehow more real than anything Cinderella had ever experienced. She looked around the garden, where flowers continued to bloom in defiance of season and reason, where fireflies had begun to dance despite the lateness of the year, where the very air seemed thick with possibility. "But I have nothing to wear," Cinderella said, the practical part of her mind struggling to accept what her heart already believed. No carriage, no invitation, no way to enter the palace without causing scandal. Her fairy godmother laughed, a sound like silver bells caught in a summer breeze. "Oh, my dear girl, you have everything you need. You have a heart full of hope, a spirit that refuses to be broken, and more courage than you realize. The rest?" She waved her hand with a flourish that sent sparkles of light cascading through the darkness. "The rest is simply a matter of proper presentation." The transformation began with the pumpkin that had been growing forgotten in the corner of the garden, swelling through summer and autumn until it had reached the size of a small room. Under the fairy godmother's gentle touch, it began to change. its orange surface smoothing and lightening until it gleamed like polished pearl. Windows appeared where none had been before, framed in gold that seemed to have been spun from captured sunlight. Wheels materialized from the earth itself, crafted from what looked like crystallized moonbeams, turning slowly with a sound like distant music. Every princess needs proper transportation, the fairy godmother explained, her eyes twinkling with delight at Cinderella's amazed expression. Though I must warn you, pumpkin magic has its limitations. When the clock strikes midnight, everything returns to its original form. The magic fades with the dying of the day, as all good magic should. Next came the horses, or rather, what had been mice just moments before. 4 of the creatures that had shared Cinderella's kitchen scraps and quiet conversations were touched by starlight and transformed into magnificent steeds, their coats shining silver white in the darkness, their manes flowing like captured wind. They stamped and snorted with eager energy, as if they understood the importance of their role in the evening's enchantment. The coachman materialized from what had been the old tomcat that slept by the kitchen fire, now dressed in livery that rivaled anything worn by the royal staff. His whiskers had become a magnificent mustache, and his eyes held the same mischievous intelligence they'd always possessed, though now paired with the dignity befitting his elevated station. "And now," the fairy godmother said, turning her attention to Cinderella herself, for the most important transformation of all. She raised her hands, and Cinderella felt warmth spread through her body, like honey poured into cold milk. Her worn work dress dissolved like morning mist, replaced by a gown that seemed to have been woven from moonlight and starshine. The fabric moved like liquid silver, catching and reflecting every source of light until she seemed to glow from within. The bodice fit as if it had been crafted specifically for her, adorned with tiny pearls that looked like captured dewdrops, while the skirt flowed around her feet like a gentle waterfall. Her hair, which had been hidden beneath a simple kerchief, now cascaded in waves that caught the light and held it, adorned with flowers that seemed to have been plucked from an eternal spring garden. Her hands, once rough from work, were now smooth and elegant, though they remained unmistakably her own. But it was the slippers that took her breath away completely. They materialized on her feet like a whispered promise, crafted from glass so clear and perfect it seemed to have been made from crystallized dreams. They fit as if they had been waiting their entire existence to cradle her feet, comfortable beyond reason and beautiful beyond description. "Glass slippers?" Cinderella asked, marveling at how they caught and scattered the light with every small movement. "Glass remembers everything," her fairy godmother explained with a knowing smile. "It remembers the sand it came from, the fire that shaped it, the hands that crafted it. Tonight, these slippers will remember every step you take, every dance you share, every moment of joy you experience. And if fate smiles upon you, they may help someone else remember you as well." Cinderella looked at herself in the surface of the carriage window, and for the first time in her life, she saw not a servant girl covered in soot and weariness, but a young woman whose beauty came not from magic alone, but from years of maintaining kindness in the face of cruelty, hope in the face of despair, and grace in the face of hardship. "Remember," her fairy godmother said as she helped Cinderella into the carriage, "the magic lasts only until midnight. When the clock begins to chime, the 12th hour, you must leave immediately, no matter what is happening. Promise me this, child." "I promise," Cinderella whispered, though part of her wondered how she could possibly leave if she found even a moment of the happiness she had dreamed of for so long. As the carriage began to move, drawn by horses whose hooves seemed to barely touch the ground, Cinderella pressed her face to the window and watched her cottage grow smaller behind them. The garden where the magic had begun was now filled with ordinary flowers, sleeping under ordinary starlight. But she carried the memory of its transformation in her heart like a sacred flame. The road to the palace stretched before them, winding through forests where ancient trees whispered secrets to the wind, and across bridges where moonlight danced on flowing water. Other carriages traveled the same path, filled with ladies dressed in their finest gowns and gentlemen in their most elegant attire, all bound for the same destination, with hopes as varied as the stars above them. But none of them traveled in a carriage made of dreams, drawn by horses born of kitchen mice and driven by a cat who had learned nobility in a single magical moment. None of them wore slippers that remembered everything, or gowns that seemed to have been cut from captured moonbeams. And none of them carried in their hearts the pure wonder of a girl who had never dared to believe that magic might touch her life until it wrapped around her like a warm embrace. As the palace grew larger in the distance, its windows blazing with golden light and its towers reaching toward the star-filled sky, Cinderella felt her heart begin to race with anticipation and terror in equal measure. Somewhere in those illuminated halls, music was playing and people were dancing, and in just a few moments, she would step into that world as if she belonged there. The prince, she knew, would be there as well, surrounded by beautiful women who had been preparing for this moment their entire lives. Would he notice one more face among so many? Would he see past the magic that adorned her to the girl who had spent her life tending fires and scrubbing floors? The carriage slowed as they approached the palace gates, where guards in ceremonial armor checked invitations and announced the arrival of each guest. Cinderella's heart hammered against her ribs as she realized she had no invitation, no way to prove her right to enter this glittering world. But as the coachman presented himself to the guards, they simply nodded and stepped aside, as if her arrival had been expected all along. Perhaps, she thought, magic created its own invitations, wrote its own rules, and opened doors that had no earthly keys. The carriage drew to a stop at the base of marble steps that seemed to ascend toward heaven itself, each one polished to mirror brightness and lined with flowering vines that released their perfume into the warm night air. Footmen in gold-braided livery hurried forward to assist her descent, their faces carefully neutral as they helped her from the carriage to the ground. Cinderella paused at the bottom of those gleaming steps, her glass slippers catching the light from 1,000 torches, and her gown flowing around her like captured starlight. Above her, the palace doors stood open, revealing glimpses of a world she had only imagined. Music drifted down to meet her, along with the sound of laughter and conversation, the rustle of silk, and the soft percussion of dancing feet against polished floors. This was the moment when her old life ended, and something entirely new began. With each step she took toward those open doors, she was walking away from the girl who had swept hearths and endured cruel words, walking toward a destiny that felt both impossible and inevitable. The glass slippers carried her up those marble steps with perfect grace, each footfall silent as a whispered prayer, each movement bringing her closer to whatever magic awaited her in the palace halls, where princes danced and dreams came true, under crystal chandeliers that held the light of 1,000 stars. The light of 1,000 stars. The palace doors opened before her like the pages of a storybook she had only dreamed of reading. The entrance hall stretched beyond imagination, its ceiling painted with scenes of cherubs dancing among clouds, while chandeliers the size of carriages cast rainbow light across walls lined with portraits of kings and queens, whose eyes seemed to follow her passage. The air itself felt different here, thick with perfume and possibility, warm with the breath of hundreds of guests who moved through the space like colorful birds in an enchanted aviary. Cinderella had expected to feel small in such grandeur, but instead, she found herself standing taller, as if the magic that had transformed her appearance had also awakened something sleeping deep within her spirit. The glass slippers carried her forward with confidence she had never possessed, each step ringing softly against marble floors that reflected her image back to her like still water under moonlight. A herald at the entrance to the great ballroom called out names as guests arrived, his voice carrying over the music and conversation with practiced authority. Lords and ladies, counts and countesses, each announcement met with polite applause and curious glances from those already assembled. When Cinderella approached, the herald paused, his eyes searching her face for recognition that never came. "Your name, miss?" he asked quietly, his voice kind but puzzled. For a moment, panic fluttered in her chest like a trapped bird. She had no title, no family name that would mean anything to these people, no identity that would grant her passage into their world. But then, the magic that surrounded her seemed to whisper in her ear, and she found herself speaking words that felt both foreign and familiar on her tongue. "The Lady Ella," she said simply, the name flowing from her lips like water from a spring. The herald nodded and raised his voice to the assembled crowd. "Presenting the Lady Ella," he announced, and suddenly every conversation stopped, every head turned, and every eye in the ballroom focused upon her with an intensity that should have terrified her, but instead filled her with a strange, quiet strength. She descended the steps into the ballroom like a swan gliding across still water, her gown trailing behind her in waves of silver and starlight. The crowd parted before her passage, not with the calculated movements of court protocol, but with the unconscious deference one pays to something beautiful and rare. Whispers followed in her wake, voices wondering who she was, where she had come from, why none of them had seen her before at court functions. The ballroom itself defied description. Crystal chandeliers hung like captured constellations, their light dancing across walls decorated with tapestries that told stories of ancient heroes in magical kingdoms. The floor was polished marble inlaid with patterns of gold that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. Musicians played from a gallery overlooking the dance floor, their melodies weaving together into something that made her heart want to soar like a bird released from its cage. But it was the people that truly transformed the space into something magical. Ladies in gowns of every color imaginable moved like living flowers, their jewels catching and scattering light with every gesture. Gentlemen in silk and velvet bowed and conversed with the practiced ease of those born to such elegance. Yet as Cinderella moved among them, she noticed something unexpected in their eyes. Beneath the polish and perfection, she glimpsed the same hopes and fears that lived in her own heart, the same longing for connection for understanding, for someone to see past their titles and treasures to the person hiding underneath. Near the center of the ballroom, on a raised platform decorated with roses and ribbons, stood the royal family. The king, distinguished and regal, wore robes of deep purple trimmed with ermine, a crown upon his brow that caught the chandelier light and threw it back in brilliant flashes. The queen beside him was elegance personified, her gown flowing around her like liquid moonlight, her smile warm but careful as she observed the festivities with eyes that missed nothing. And between them stood Prince Charming himself, resplendent in midnight blue velvet with silver embroidery that traced patterns like frost on a winter window. He was handsome, certainly, with dark hair that caught the light and eyes the color of stormy skies. But it was something else that drew Cinderella's attention, something she saw in the way he held himself, the careful distance he maintained, even while surrounded by admirers. There was loneliness there, she realized, the same ache she had carried in her own heart for so many years. He was listening to a young woman in rose-colored silk who spoke with animated gestures about something that clearly bored him. His smile polite but distant. His eyes wandered the ballroom with the restless energy of someone searching for something he couldn't name. And when his gaze swept across the crowd and landed upon Cinderella, the world seemed to stop spinning on its axis. Time stretched like honey between them, golden and sweet and infinite. She felt his recognition not as a memory, but as a homecoming, as if her soul had been waiting her entire life for this exact moment when two hearts would look across a crowded room and understand that they had found their missing piece. The music continued around them. Couples continued dancing. Conversations continued flowing. But for Cinderella and the prince, everything else faded into background noise. He excused himself from the young woman in rose silk, with words she didn't hear, his movements carrying him through the crowd, with purpose that made courtiers step aside and whisper behind their fans. Cinderella stood frozen in place, her heart hammering against her ribs like a wild thing seeking escape. As he approached with steps that seemed to cover impossible distances in mere moments, when he finally stood before her, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his storm-gray eyes, close enough to catch the scent of cedar and starlight that seemed to cling to his clothes. The rest of the ballroom disappeared entirely. They might have been alone in an enchanted forest, for all the awareness she had of anything beyond his presence. "My lady," he said, his voice carrying a warmth that seemed to wrap around her like a velvet cloak. "I confess myself at a disadvantage. I thought I knew every guest who would grace our ball tonight, yet I find myself facing the most captivating woman in the room, and I don't even know her name." "Ella," she replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice, when her entire being felt like it was trembling on the edge of flight. "Lady Ella," he smiled then, an expression that transformed his entire face from merely handsome to absolutely radiant. "Lady Ella," he repeated, as if tasting the syllables like fine wine. "I am Prince Christopher, though I suspect you already knew that. Would you honor me with a dance?" The question hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. And Cinderella realized that her answer would determine not just the next few minutes, but possibly the entire course of her life. She could feel the weight of every gaze in the ballroom upon them, could sense the mixture of curiosity and envy radiating from the other young women who had harbored their own dreams of dancing with the prince. But when she looked into his eyes, all of that fell away, leaving only the simple truth that her heart had been waiting for this moment since she was old enough to understand what longing meant. She placed her gloved hand in his offered palm, feeling warmth spread up her arm like liquid sunlight, and nodded. "I would be honored, Your Highness," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. He led her onto the dance floor as the orchestra began a waltz that seemed to have been written specifically for this moment. Other couples joined them, but Cinderella was aware only of the prince's hand at her waist, guiding her through steps she somehow knew despite never having learned them. The glass slippers carried her across the polished marble as if she were floating on air, each movement perfectly synchronized with his, as if they had been dancing together for years rather than moments. "You dance beautifully," he murmured as they swept past a pillar decorated with climbing roses. "Where did you learn?" The honest answer would have been that she had never learned, that she was somehow dancing through magic and instinct, and the way his eyes looked at her, as if she were the only person in the world. Instead, she found herself saying, "My heart taught me, Your Highness. Sometimes the soul knows things the mind has never studied." Something shifted in his expression at her words, a recognition that went deeper than mere attraction. "Yes," he said quietly, as if she had solved a riddle he had been pondering his entire life. "Yes, I believe it does." They danced through song after song, lost in conversation that flowed as naturally as breathing. He told her about the weight of expectations that pressed upon his shoulders, about nights spent walking palace gardens and wondering if he would ever find someone who saw him as more than just a title and a crown. She spoke carefully but honestly about understanding the feeling of being trapped by circumstances beyond one's control, about dreams that seemed as distant as stars but burned just as brightly in the darkness. With each shared confidence, each moment of recognition that passed between them, the connection deepened into something that felt both new and ancient, as if their souls had known each other across lifetimes and were simply remembering what they had temporarily forgotten. The prince's initial politeness gave way to genuine laughter at her gentle wit, while her nervousness dissolved in the warmth of his attention, replaced by a confidence she had never known she possessed. Around them, the ballroom continued its elaborate dance of courtship and politics, but they moved through it like travelers in a private world. Other young ladies waited hopefully for their turn to dance with the prince, their mothers watching with calculating eyes, and their fathers discussing potential alliances in hushed tones. The king and queen observed their son's obvious enchantment with this mysterious lady, with expressions that mixed pleasure at his happiness with concern about her unknown origins. But Prince Christopher seemed oblivious to all of it, his attention focused entirely on the young woman in his arms, who spoke to him not as subjects speak to princes, but as one soul speaks to another. When she laughed at something he said, the sound was like silver bells in a spring breeze. And when she looked at him with those eyes that seemed to hold starlight, he felt as if he were discovering what it meant to be alive for the very first time. "Tell me about yourself, Lady Ella," he said as they paused between dances, accepting glasses of champagne from a passing servant. "Your family, your home. I want to know everything." Panic fluttered briefly in her chest as she realized how little she could safely reveal without exposing the magic that had brought her here. But then she remembered her fairy godmother's words about truth being more powerful than any enchantment, and she found a way to speak honestly without revealing too much. "I come from a small cottage at the edge of the village," she said, watching his face carefully for any change in expression. "My life there has been quiet, simple. I spend my days caring for others, tending to household duties, dreaming of something more than the narrow world I've always known." Instead of the disdain she half expected, she saw only understanding in his eyes. "And do you find happiness in such a life?" he asked gently. "I find purpose in it," she replied after a moment's consideration. "And purpose, I've learned, can sustain the heart even when happiness seems distant. But tonight," she paused, looking around the glittering ballroom before meeting his gaze again. "Tonight, I feel as if I'm discovering what happiness might actually feel like." The prince set down his champagne glass without drinking from it, his eyes never leaving her face. "Would it sound terribly forward if I said that I feel exactly the same way? As if I've been sleepwalking through my life until this moment." Before she could answer, the orchestra began to play again. This time, a slower, more intimate melody that seemed to invite couples to move closer together on the dance floor. The prince extended his hand once more, and without hesitation, Cinderella placed hers within it, allowing him to lead her back into the magical space where only they existed. This dance was different from the others. Where before there had been proper distance and formal steps, now they moved together with an intimacy that made the watching courtiers whisper behind their fans, and the queen raise her eyebrows with maternal concern. The prince's hand at her waist drew her closer than strict propriety allowed, while her hand on his shoulder seemed to burn through the velvet of his jacket with its warmth. They moved together like two parts of the same whole, like water flowing around stone, like birds who had learned to fly in perfect formation. The glass slippers remembered every step, just as her fairy godmother had promised, storing away each moment of this impossible evening, like treasures in a vault that time could never rob. "Ella," the prince whispered her name like a prayer, his breath warm against her ear as they turned in perfect synchronization. "I know this sounds impossible, but I feel as if I've been waiting for you my entire life without even knowing I was waiting." Her heart swelled with such joy that she feared it might burst from her chest like a bird set free from its cage. "Christopher," she replied, using his given name without his title for the first time. "Nothing about tonight feels impossible anymore." The music swirled around them, carrying them through the dance like leaves on an autumn wind, while the chandelier light painted them in shades of gold and silver that made them look like figures from a fairy tale come to life. Other couples danced around them, but they existed in their own bubble of enchantment, speaking in whispers and shared glances, discovering that sometimes two souls can recognize each other instantly across all the barriers that society and circumstance erect between them. As the evening progressed, they found reasons to remain together. When dinner was announced, the prince insisted she sit beside him at the high table, ignoring the seating arrangements that had been planned for months. When other gentlemen approached, asking for dances, he politely but firmly declined on her behalf, claiming every remaining song for himself. The other young ladies watched with growing dismay as their hopes of capturing the prince's attention withered like flowers in winter frost. Cinderella's stepfamily, resplendent in their finest gowns, moved through the crowd like ships navigating familiar waters, completely failing to recognize the soot-covered girl who had helped them dress just hours before. Her stepmother danced with aging lords and discussed marriage prospects with their wives, while her stepsisters preened and posed, waiting for their moment to catch the prince's eye. They passed within arm's reach of Cinderella several times throughout the evening, their gazes sliding over her without recognition, as if the magic that had transformed her appearance had also rendered her invisible to those who had seen only a servant when they looked at her before. But as the night wore on and the candles burned lower in their golden holders, Cinderella became increasingly aware of the passage of time. Each chime of the palace clocks sent a chill of worry through her heart, reminding her that this magical evening had an expiration date written in the movement of celestial bodies across the star-filled sky. When the great clock in the palace tower began to strike 11, she felt the first flutter of panic in her chest, though she tried to hide it from the prince, who was telling her about his plans to improve conditions for the common people in his future kingdom. But as the minutes ticked by with increasing speed, she found it harder and harder to focus on his words, her attention drawn again and again to the ornate timepieces that decorated the ballroom walls. "You seem distracted, my lady," Prince Christopher observed with concern, his hand covering hers where it rested on the table between them. "Is something troubling you?" How could she explain that every moment that passed brought her closer to losing not just the magic that had made this evening possible, but quite possibly the only chance she would ever have to know what love felt like? How could she tell him that when midnight struck, she would transform back into a girl in rags who scrubbed floors and tended fires, someone so far beneath his station that even speaking to her would be scandalous? "I'm simply aware that all beautiful things must eventually come to an end," she said finally, trying to keep the sadness from her voice. "Even the most perfect evening cannot last forever." He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her gloved knuckles, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. "Perhaps not," he said quietly, "but some beautiful things leave marks on the soul that last far beyond a single evening. Some connections transcend time itself." The words were so close to her own thoughts that she felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. If only he knew how right he was, how this single evening would live in her memory like a flame that no amount of hardship could extinguish. If only she could tell him that he had awakened something in her heart that would burn bright long after the magic faded and reality reclaimed her. The clock struck the quarter hour, and Cinderella felt her fairy godmother's warning echo in her mind like a bell tolling. She had perhaps 30 minutes left before everything changed, before the carriage became a pumpkin and the horses returned to being mice, before her gown dissolved like morning mist and her glass slippers. She looked down at the magical footwear that had carried her through this enchanted evening, wondering what would happen to them when the spell broke. Would they shatter like her dreams, leaving nothing behind but fragments and memories? Or would they somehow survive the transformation, proof that this night had been real, rather than just an elaborate fantasy born of loneliness and desperate hope? Hope. The prince noticed the shadow that crossed her face, the way her fingers trembled slightly where they rested beneath his. "Ella," he said softly, his voice carrying a note of concern that made her heart ache with tenderness. "You've grown quiet. Have I said something to distress you?" She forced herself to meet his eyes, those storm-gray depths that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat in the space of a few magical hours. How could she explain that distress wasn't the right word for what she felt, that it was more like the bittersweet pain of holding something precious that you must soon release. "Not at all," she replied, managing a smile that felt both genuine and heartbreaking. "I was simply thinking about how strange life can be, how sometimes the most unexpected moments become the most treasured ones." Before he could respond, the orchestra began to play again, this time a melody so hauntingly beautiful that it seemed to pull at something deep within her chest. The prince rose and extended his hand once more, and she took it without hesitation, allowing him to lead her onto the dance floor for what she knew might be their final dance together. And so our story draws to its close, like the final notes of a lullaby that carries you gently into dreams. As midnight chimed and magic faded, as glass slippers were left behind, and true hearts remembered what they had found, we discover that the greatest enchantment was never in the transformation at all. It lived in the courage to believe that love sees beyond appearances, that kindness creates its own magic, and that sometimes the most beautiful beginnings start with a single dance under starlight. Sleep well, and may your dreams be filled